Let's go out to Maine. We've got Grant, he, him, and you are on the line with Blatant Atheist and Secular Rarity. How are you, Grant?
Hi, I'm doing good.
Yeah, thanks for calling us today. What do you got for us?
Sure. I wanted to talk with you folks about the way that I hear sometimes other atheists explain or ground morality.
Yeah.
And I often hear it kind of described in terms of agreeing on a set of goals and assessing whether certain actions are consistent with those goals.
Mhm.
And this doesn't strike me as a good way to talk about it. I feel like it's too abstract, and I have a way that seems better to me. And I want you guys to tell me if if I'm onto something or if I'm off base.
Yeah, give us a go. Run us through what you're thinking.
Okay, this is what I would say. I would say an action is immoral if and only if it can be reasonably inferred to result in greater suffering.
I'll stop you right here with the most obvious question, Grant, is just why?
Sure.
Why is it immoral if it causes greater suffering? I may agree with that, but what is the objective grounding for that, in your opinion?
Sure. So what I'm saying to you is that, to me, this is the definition of what it means to be immoral. Okay, I'm defining immorality that way to start with.
Yeah. And I
say is,
go ahead.
I feel like when we talk about morality, to me, it seems like, I've given this a little bit of thought, this is really what we're getting at. I feel like if I'm going to make an analogy, like, we all know what water is, but many, many years ago, people didn't really understand that water was like a substance made of H2O molecules, right? Yeah. But if they talked about water in a non-abstract way, that's what they were talking about. We now know water is H2O, right?
Yeah. Our knowledge has expanded on that.
Right. I feel like it seems to me, and again, correct me, tell me where you think I'm going wrong, that when we talk about morality, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about whether actions lead to greater suffering or not.
Mm-hmm. So I would just start off by saying, I think in general, Grant, where you're going is pretty much where I stand. And there are a lot of people that stand in that camp too. That kind of general well-being type thing, is that completely defined? No, but we have some really good understanding. Like cutting off somebody's head is not good for their well-being. We're pretty solid on that.
Right.
The issue is that there are a handful of people, non-religious and religious, that fall into this other vein. So where you and I are at with agreeing on that is basically like, if what we're trying to say is that there is something more than just all of our collective, desires, and it's just like, well, I don't like this, that's why it's immoral, then what we're saying is that there is something outside of the individual consciousnesses of people, right? And if we add all those up together, and that's just, an ad populum, right? It's just an ad populum fallacy at that point, because it's like, oh, well, it's not right when just the one person thinks it, but if we just add 100 people together, now it somehow becomes right. So the non-realists and the non-cognitivists and stuff, those are the people that would say that morality at the end of the day is just this completely made up thing, more or less, right? And there's a handful of people I know I've listened to in the past where they basically say like, hey, I agree, like we should try to minimize suffering, but the question is not whether or not I agree on that. The question is that something that is coming outside of me? Is that something that is separate from me? Because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about an objective morality more often than not. We're talking about something like
I think
gravity or math, right? Like if I disappear tomorrow, it doesn't matter what I think about gravity either way, because the gravity's still going to be there, And so that's where I think you would probably have some of the most pushback. When it comes to a good handful of the realists, though, yeah, for sure, this is something that is used. And I would probably even argue, I think pretty much every single moral system we've ever codified out there is using that generalized well-being. It's just that they don't always apply it correctly or to the full extent, right? And so I think there's possibly an argument.
Is that not evidence that there is and that is the standard for all kind of conversion of the same thing? If we all
Now,
measure gravity at 9.8 meters per second squared, that we're onto the same thing, is that not
the,
evidence to the fact?
I mean,
the,
but if you look
That's
at even
the
what you were
standard?
saying, like just the way we learn more and we change over time with more information, morality isn't going to be the same morality 100 years from now
right,
because we'll know more. We'll have different standards.
right.
So it's never going
Is
to
that,
be
is
an
that,
objective,
can
this is concrete type of thing.
I think we can make a distinguish, I think we can distinguish between what the standard of morality is, like what's the yardstick for measuring it, and what we judge based on our limited information as being moral or immoral, right?
Sure. So as
Like
we
we
gain
may
more
disagree,
knowledge,
like
we'll
you
get
and I might have
better.
a different judgment
Mhm.
about whether something is moral or immoral, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we disagree on the standard.
True, but the issue is that there are people out there who disagree with all of the standards, basically. And what they're
Right.
saying at
So are
the
they
end of
right
the
or am I
day
right?
is, well, I don't know. That's the thing. I mean, if I had that figured out, Grant, I'd be congratulating myself for my Nobel Prize, right? But
Yeah,
I
to me, this seems like the right way to define it, and I don't understand why people kind of go back, take that step back, and say, "Well, it's a,
yeah,
if you
and
agree on a
my
goal, or we all seem to be talking about the same thing."
Yeah, and my biggest suggestion would just be look into more of those people that take the label of non-cognitivist or moral non-realist, and go read through their arguments and see if they hold up for you. This is not the
Yeah.
majority of the philosophers when they get polled for the Phil survey and stuff, but it is still enough of a group that you definitely have to deal with the arguments. And at the end of the day, they are arguments, and so it's worth to at least look at them, even if, again, basically everything you've said, Grant, I think I pretty much, fall on the same page. I think Blayton is right there with us. It's
Yep.
just that there are some people who would still take the stance of, hey, what you're saying at the end of the day is basically, I just have this preference, and because of that preference, this is the right thing to do. And what they're saying is there's
Oh,
a
I
break
prefer to do
between that.
immoral things all the time. It's not about my preference.
Yeah, but you see kind of what they're saying is the determination for
I
moral or
do kind of.
immoral. Yeah, and that's why I would just
Sure.
say go look into that some more. I know J Mike is a moral non-realist. I'm pretty sure on that because he's spoken about it.
All right.
And
Maybe I can find
listening
a
to
show he's on, and I'll call him and talk to him about it.
Oh, he comes on Talk Heathen a good bit. Yeah, he's a regular here in AXP and stuff, and so definitely just check out the shows and see when he's on next, because he always is very quick to say to people, hey, look, I understand and I agree punching this guy in the face is the wrong idea, but the question is why? And from what you're saying,
Yeah,
and not
as a cause
you
of suffering. That's
specifically.
why.
Right. And the response from the non-realist would basically be something along the lines of like, well, that's just a personal preference, and there's nothing connected to the objective world outside of our individual brain states that makes that true.
Can
Right.
we not establish that people experience suffering objectively? Is that not something
So
we can establish? I mean, I realize the experience of suffering itself is objective, but isn't it objective that we experience suffering?
yes, it's just that that isn't indication that it means suffering is bad in that grand moral sense. We do experience suffering and we do seemingly like to avoid it, but that doesn't mean
Right.
that it is
I
something
mean, I
outside of
think to
our
me
own
that's the definition of
preferences.
suffering. It's like it's what you would try to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah, and I again, pretty much everything you're saying, I'm like pretty lockstep with you, Grant. It's just I'm trying to present the argument from the side of the people that
I know,
would
devil's advocate,
disagree
all that. I
very
get it.
strongly. Yeah, but they'd still be pretty much
Yeah.
all of those people that I know are non-religious, and so I still think they're using a better system than some book said something or some deity in the sky said something. But I've been rambling a bunch. Let me give it back to Blayton real quick, and then we'll let you go, Grant.
I think the only thing
Okay.
that I would say is like when we're talking about suffering being what you would like to avoid, there are people that would like to avoid going outside. Like I would like to avoid going
Yep.
to work, but so I suffer when I go to work, but it doesn't have any standard for morality. So again, all of this
The way
stuff
it
is
would,
pretty
the
much
way it
going
would,
to be
the way I
subjective.
would kind of see that is so. First of, I'm sorry. Finish your thought. I
Oh,
thought
you're
you were
good.
going somewhere
Oh,
else.
you're
I'm
good.
sorry.
Oh, you're good.
All right. So just to be clear, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to define morality as evaluating whether actions will result in greater suffering.
Right.
So whether, like, if I do something, like if I go to work and I don't want to go to work, that's kind of like, for me, that's not really resulting in greater suffering in the large. And in fact, what I'm trying to do for myself is reduce my own suffering. I know I'm going to suffer more if I don't go to work.
Sure.
But it's not about morality. It's not about my own personal suffering. It's suffering in the largest sphere of awareness that I have.
Yeah. And again,
if I find out like chewing on a pencil causes suffering for aliens in another galaxy, somehow, to me, that makes it immoral now, if I'm aware of that.
Sure. Just be careful that we're not doing the same thing that we accuse the religious of by defining something into existence. Just because we define something a certain way doesn't mean that it is that necessarily. And that's where the crux of the issue is, I think.
I think a lot of theists would say morality is what God says. Like if you're deviating from what God wants you to do, you're doing something immoral. And if I was in a conversation with one of those people, I'd start playing the game of like, whose definition of morality better comports with how we actually use that word. And I feel good about my position in that conversation.
Yeah. And I
agree with you completely. Yeah. But yeah, it's just still, it's your standard.
Right. And again, there are others out there who have good arguments that I definitely think are worth taking into account. Doesn't mean that those are right. Sure. It just means, hey, definitely another great place to go and look. So non-cognitivists and moral non-realists and stuff. But Grant, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and giving us a call. That was a really good discussion. And I love doing that. I love talking about morality, and I love hashing it out, especially when we aren't, beholden to this deity, right? I feel like the conversation about morality can actually progress.